So it's April, guys. Like, it is getting to the time of year where things really start getting interesting. It's been my part of the country anyway. I've been traveling all over the place. I was just in Tennessee. I was in Florida this spring. But now, here back home, today was the first day. Today is March 31st when I'm shooting this video. And it is the first day that it has remained above freezing. Through the night, it was actually warm and there was frogs out. Now, I don't know how important you understand that is. That is huge. So now it is getting to be that fun time of year when fish are going to start pushing shallow. And it's not always like right away, but it's now going to start happening. So I want to talk about the baits that I am going to be throwing when I get out on my home lakes as well as across the country, because the baits that I'm going to talk about are going to go all over the place. These are the baits that I had on my deck in Florida, I had in Tennessee, I had in Alabama. All of it is the same thing. Or it works all over the place. And so the first bait that I want to talk about is a Z-Man palmetto bug and a jig. I'm not going to pair them together necessarily, but these two baits are starting to be big players. As those fish are starting to push up shallow in Alabama, I was sight fishing for them. I was using a palmetto bug. I was looking at these fish and they were on a bed, you know. So that was a fun part of it. When I was in Florida, there were fish on beds. That palmetto bug really plays there. But up here, up north, a jig is starting to play because those fish are starting to get on those primary and secondary points. They're starting to get on laydowns on bluffs, and they're starting to slide up. They're not necessarily getting shallow to spawn, but what they're doing is that warmer water is now near the surface, so they're starting to ease their way up, and these two baits are starting to become big players for me. I like to pair them with 15 to 20 pound P-line tactical fluorocarbon, and as always, I'll have the links to the gear that I throw it on down below. I'm not going to bore you guys with all of those details, but if you have any questions about anything during the video, throw them down below in the comments. I'm usually pretty good about getting back to you guys on that. So that's the number one bait that I want to talk about. The number two bait is one that you guys have heard me talk about a lot. That's going to be a jerkbait. I use a 6 cents Provoke and a Mega Bass Vision 110. I pair those a lot together. The Provoke is a really good deep diving bait. Even though it's not necessarily a deep diver, it looks like a +1 type model. It still does a good job. I can get that sucker all the way down at 12 feet and hit the bottom, which is pretty impressive. And so the Vision 110s run a little bit shallower. But as those fish are starting to transition, we're still getting some cold fronts, and so that jerkbait still triggers those fish, and it's still going to get me a lot of bites, which is why I always keep it on deck, because even like I'm going to Texas here next week, I'll still have a jerkbait on the deck just because the shad spawn is happening in a lot of places. And so that's why I like to have that jerkbait, because nothing imitates a shad better than that jerkbait. Really triggers fish, really fires them up. And up here up north, it still catches those colder water fish. You know, some of these reservoirs are still in that 45-degree temperatures. Even up further north, the water temp's probably 40. So that jerkbait will still catch fish as these days start to get warm. The key is paying attention to the weather now. As we start to get these warming trends, those are the days, if you can only fish a couple days, those are the days that you want to go. So if you get 2 or 3 days of warm weather back to back, you get a warm rain, those are the days you're going to want to get out, because even if your water temp's 42, those fish are still going to fire, and it's going to be awesome bites. So the next bait that I want to talk about is one that pretty much everybody throws all the time, and that's going to be a lipless crankbait. I use two primarily. I use a 6 cents Duke, and I think it's a 5/8 ounce. Craw colors specifically, shad colors if I'm around it. And then another one that I really like that's kind of a sleeper is a Berkeley War Pig. It's a 1/4 ounce lipless, and so I can get away with fishing it a lot shallower and fishing it a lot slower than I can with the Duke or with a Quake or with any traditional lipless other than that. So that 1/4 ounce model is a really big player for me, because we get these warm days and sometimes these fish will slide way back into these pockets, or real shallow. They'll get up really shallow on points, and I can just fish that 1/4 ounce a lot slower and a lot more efficiently in some of that shallow water. And if it's still cold, I can rip it through grass, and it gets just a different action and a different sound. So that 1/4 ounce, that War Pig, is one to not sleep on. Actually caught me some fish in the Bassmaster Classic, which is a pretty cool bait. So that's going to kind of transition us to our next bait, which is going to be the category of flat-sided crankbaits. There's two primarily that I throw. I throw the 6 cents Finesse F4, but it's kind of a loud bait. I've made some of them silent. But another bait that I really like that you guys have seen all over the place is going to be that Berkeley Fritz side. Also a super, super awesome bait. It's just a bit downsized from that 6 cents Finesse F4, as you can see, and it's just a little less intrusive bait. So if I get dirtier water, definitely going with that Finesse F4, but cleaner water, smaller fish, I'm gonna go with that Fritz side day in and day out. And those are just two really, really good baits to cover water with. I like the Finesse F4 around rock, but that, man, this little guy gets bit around wood really, really, really well. That Fritz side, it just deflects well. It has a squarer bill on it, so it does a better job of deflecting off cover. Because what's happening, as these fish are starting to transition back, they like these hard targets. You know, first thing in the spring, that wood is going to be a big, big player. Wood, rock, anything that's sticking out of the water, because that stuff holds heat so much better. Obviously, you have grass, fish it, because there's always bass in grass. That's like a general rule of thumb, especially hydrilla. But I'm going to be using these Fritz sides, that Finesse F4, to get back into some of these pockets and deflect it off wood, cover water on that rock. Just that flat side bait does a better job of getting bit in the springtime than your traditional crankbaits do. So that's why I'm always going to have that one on my deck. And the last bait that I want to talk about is one that we throw everywhere every time of the year, and that is just a chatterbait. This is a Z-Man jackhammer. And guys, there's nothing like that bait. There really isn't. I can get some crazy, crazy strikes. I can fish it in 40-degree water and get bites, and I can fish it in 100-degree water and get bites. I've actually caught fish on it in 90, I think I fished it in like 99-degree water one time, which is insane, right? I think it was a James River. No, not James River. It was on Kerr Lake in June or July. It was insanely hot water. But the key is the trailers that you put on the back of a jackhammer. I have two that I'm going to, well, three that I'm going to throw that are going to change the game for how it fishes. The first is going to be throwing a paddle tail swim bait on the back of it. I like the Z-Man models. I like the Z-Man, there's a Z swimmer that works really, really good, and then there's also the Z-Man diesel minnow. Also works super, super awesome. But the key is, if you guys have watched any of my other videos, I flip them upside down. So that way that paddle tail actually gets the water going over top of it you need. And it slows that bait down and it gives it a bigger presence. And so that works a lot better in colder water. And then as that water starts to get warmer, then I'm going to go to your traditional minnow style trailers. I really like the Z-Man models just for these chatterbaits because they have great action and they're like indestructible, guys. They seriously, seriously are. So that razor shad for the minnow style trailers, as that water gets the warmest it's going to be, is going to be my absolute go-to. It's going to have a tighter wobble. It's going to imitate shad better. This is also going to be a shad spawn bait for me. But you throw it in green pumpkin and you got a great bluegill bait too. Works great in dirty water, clean water. I cannot stress this bait enough. The key is it gets big bites, guys. And that's going to be something as tournament season is picking up. You got to throw the bites that you're going to get, or baits that you're going to get big bites on. And all the ones that I've talked about today are baits that you can get big bites on and are traditionally known for catching bigger fish. And so the other trailer that I will put on the back of that jackhammer is a Z-Man goat, which has the two kicking tails. If I'm around a lot of bluegill, I don't know the science behind it, but I just know whenever I get around bluegill and I throw that goat style trailer, man, it does a great job. And if you're trying to fish it super, super shallow, those two parallel kickers on there, man, they keep that bait up in the water column and allow you to fish that bait so much shallower than any of the other trailers. So those are my top 5 baits for April. As always, guys, hit that subscribe button to follow along. Check out my classic update where I talk about my Bassmaster Classic appearance. And as always, guys, God bless. Y'all take care and have a happy Easter.